History is usually told as a story of great men, brilliant ideas, and terrible decisions, and that's all true. But it misses a key character, one that's always there, quietly ruining everyone's day: the weather. Between roughly 1300 and 1850, the planet got a little moody. They call it the Little Ice Age. It wasn't a true ice age with mammoths and glaciers covering continents, but more like the Earth's thermostat broke and got stuck on uncomfortably chilly for 5 centuries. And this slight temperature drop turned out to be the ultimate stress test for humanity, proving that when people get cold and hungry, their first instinct is to overthrow the government. Predictable, really. Before the Big Chill, Europe was enjoying something called the medieval warm period. Think of it as the planet's brief flirtation with being a decent place to live. Grapes were growing in England, which is just fundamentally wrong. The Norse were happily farming in Greenland, calling it Greenland in what must be the most successful marketing lie in history. Population was booming, harvests were reliable, and things were, for medieval times, looking up. It was the perfect setup. The universe gave humanity a few centuries of decent weather just to see how spectacularly they could mess it all up when it was taken away. A classic bait and switch. So, what happened? Did the planet just get sad? Not exactly. A few things went wrong at once. For starters, the sun decided to get lazy. A period called the Maunder Minimum, from about 1645 to 1715, saw an almost complete disappearance of sunspots. Fewer sunspots means slightly less solar energy reaching Earth. It's like the sun turned its brightness down from 10 to 9.5. Doesn't sound like much, right? Tell that to the guy whose wheat field is frozen in July. Then, to make things more exciting, volcanoes started having a party. Massive eruptions like the 1452 Kuwait event threw so much ash into the atmosphere it acted like a planetary sunshade, reflecting sunlight back into space. So you had a dimmer sun and a planetary umbrella. The perfect recipe for disaster. The effects on the ground were noticeable. This wasn't just about needing an extra blanket. In the Alps, glaciers started advancing. Not in a metaphorical sense, they literally grew and crept down mountainsides, swallowing whole villages. Imagine being evicted from your home because a giant block of ice is your new landlord and it doesn't care about your lease. In London, the River Thames froze solid so often they started holding frost fairs on the ice. There were booths, elephant parades, the whole 9 yards. It sounds fun until you remember the reason you can have a carnival on a river is because it's so cold that agriculture, and therefore society, is on the verge of collapsing. But hey, at least they had entertainment. The first big test came early, with the Great Famine of 1315 to 1317. It was an apocalyptic trifecta of cold, rain, and total crop failure. It rained so much that seeds rotted in the ground before they could sprout. What little grain was harvested had to be dried indoors. The price of wheat shot up by over 300%. The chronicles from the time are grim. They talk about people eating dogs, cats, and the bark from trees. And then, because humans are nothing if not resourceful, they started eating each other. This wasn't some isolated incident. It was a continent-wide catastrophe that killed millions. It was the universe clearing its throat, saying, "This is what the next 500 years are going to feel like. Enjoy." Faced with an inexplicable, long-term climate disaster, you'd expect the leaders of the day to invest in agricultural science, right? Maybe develop hardier crops? Of course not. They did something much more logical. They blamed witches. The peak of the European witch hunts, particularly in Central Europe, lines up beautifully with some of the coldest periods of the Little Ice Age. Your milk curdles? A witch. A hailstorm ruins your barley? Witch. Your cow dies? Definitely a witch. It was the perfect system. It required no understanding of meteorology, gave people a sense of control, and provided a handy excuse to get rid of your annoying neighbor. Problem solving at its absolute finest. By the 17th century, the relentless cold and hunger were grinding society down. This period is sometimes called the General Crisis. And right in the middle of it, Europe decided to have the 30 Years' War, because organized religion is always a great thing to argue about when everyone is starving. The war itself was catastrophic, but the climate made it so much worse. Armies stripped the countryside bare, and repeated crop failures meant there was nothing left. Soldiers weren't just fighting each other, they were fighting for the last edible scraps. It turned a political conflict into an existential nightmare. It's estimated that some parts of Germany lost over 50% of their population. The Little Ice Age didn't start the war, but it poured gasoline all over the fire. And now for the main event, the French Revolution. Everyone knows the story. Angry peasants, out-of-touch aristocrats, lots of beheadings. But let's look at the weather report for the 1780s. In 1783, the Laki volcano in Iceland erupted for 8 months straight. It spewed a haze of sulfur dioxide across Europe, causing a brutal volcanic winter. Crops failed. This was followed by a series of droughts and severe winters. By 1788, France had the worst harvest in nearly a century. The price of bread, the staple food for 90% of the population, went through the roof. A Parisian worker might spend 88% of his daily wage on bread alone. Suddenly, abstract ideas about liberty and fraternity become a lot less important than the very concrete idea of not starving to death. The Bastille wasn't just stormed for political reasons, it was stormed because people were hungry and they were angry. Just when you thought it was over, the planet delivered an encore. In 1815, Mount Tambora in Indonesia produced the largest volcanic eruption in recorded history. The next year, 1816, became known as the Year Without a Summer. There was snow in New England in June. Europe was plunged into a famine worse than anything seen during the Napoleonic Wars that had just ended. In Switzerland, people were eating moss and sawdust. This global crisis had some weird side effects. The price of oats skyrocketed, making it too expensive to feed horses, which led a German inventor named Karl Dries to create a personal mobility device that didn't need food: the bicycle. Meanwhile, a group of bored, wealthy English writers were stuck indoors in Switzerland because of the endless rain. To pass the time, they told ghost stories. One of them, a teenager named Mary Shelley, wrote a story that would become Frankenstein. So yes, a volcanic eruption on the other side of the world is indirectly responsible for both the bicycle and one of the greatest horror novels ever written. History is weird. So, was the Little Ice Age the secret puppet master behind 5 centuries of human history? No, that's too simple. Humans are perfectly capable of starting wars, creating terrible economic policies, and generally making a mess of things all on their own. We don't need help. But the Little Ice Age was the ultimate destabilizing agent. It was a constant, grinding pressure on the weakest point of every society: its food supply. It took existing tensions, religious, political, social, and turned the heat down and the pressure up until something inevitably broke. It proves that for all our grand ideas and complex civilizations, we are never more than a few bad harvests away from complete chaos. It's a humbling thought, and also a terrifyingly relevant one. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, and subscribe to our channel for more historical insights. Thanks for watching, nerds!